Alright. The order is going to be the spending disadvantage, the state's counter plan, and then the case study. Actually, let's see what these boxes. Oh, no. Sorry. Everybody ready? Good. In assessing the disadvantage versus the case, there are some critical impact comparisons that need to be made in this debate. The first is assessing what exactly the 1AC attempts to solve for, what exactly it is going to make better, and how that will affect everyone's lives. In a simple comparison, although increasing education has many benefits, it simply does not have any of those benefits in a world in which the economy is in the tank. Even if we have people who are well educated, they are not going to be able to find jobs or be able to research what they need to in a world in which no one has funding for these types of programs. This means any risk that the 1AC can terminally destroy the economy or even harm it to the point that jobs will be harder to find is a reason why they cannot solve and can only worsen the problems that the 1NC silk evidence indicates are massive and worldwide, such as disease, AIDS, and other forms of conflicts that arise from large economic crises. Additionally, this double-bind argument, which is his first argument in the debate, makes zero sense. The Chattanooga Times evidence from the 1NC indicates that the spending for the stimulus and other bills has been incorporated into the budget. That was our idea of how to bring the economy back together. A massive nationwide welfare program that involves every state school who can apply for more funding as long as they can justify it would obviously be something that was not anticipated by this budget process. Additionally, the Just Politics evidence indicates that although these forms of spending might be beneficial to the economy, i.e. building new roads, manufacturing infrastructure positions, the forms of social welfare programs, as hashed out in cross-sects, are at best long-term benefits that are hard to measure. You should err on the side of a uniqueness story that makes sense in the context of an overall budget, rather than a speculative story that will take at best 20 years down the road to turn itself over. This brings us to the next argument, which is that a focus on education is good for the economy overall. The first question you must ask yourself is, where is the uniqueness for this argument? Although the education system of the United States might not be the best in the world, it still is by far better than what we could have as a problem. What I'm saying here is basically the education system is still keeping our economy together to a certain extent now. There is, however, a high possibility that the AFT spending will lead to a collapse of the economy. Why then should we sacrifice something that not only would prevent them from making the economy better, or rather the education system better in the future, but also why would this program help the economy in any way as per the budget? Additionally, the plan would be a form of entitlement spending, as noticed by Insight News in 1994. When most Americans think of entitlements, they think of welfare programs for the poor. There's no question that welfare spending has been massive. $5.1 trillion since the War of Poverty began in 1964. What's amazing is that the programs designed specifically for low-income Americans, food stamps, aid to families with dependent children, Medicaid, form only the tip of the entitlement pyramid. Additionally, new entitlement spending will explode debt and greatly hurt the American economy, from more in 2009. Debt soars under either baseline because of unrelated growth to growth in federal spending. Entitlement spending is part of mandatory spending and growth on autopilot. The automatic growth leads to exploding costs. Now that Americans are all too familiar with the problems associated with economic slowdowns and trillion-dollar deficits, Congress ought to take the warnings issued by the CBO's long-term budget outlook seriously. Adding new entitlements will be disingenuous at best and economically debilitating at worst. The next argument is that the U.S. economy is strong and still can maintain its own form. Although this evidence speaks with broad rhetoric, it does not take into account the 1NC evidence, which indicates that the economy is at a particularly volatile time right now. I think this is easily observable to anyone who's been watching the news lately, when each day it's a new assessment by anyone and everyone. We are at a crucial point in which we have made large promises, not only to ourselves, but also America's future, vis-a-vis stimulus spending, and we cannot tank those with efforts to save the economy 20 years down the road and only hurt ourselves in the short term. Let's now look more directly at the state's counterplan. His first argument is that the two are not mutually exclusive because both can happen at the same time. The problem with this argument is that that would still link to our disadvantage of federal spending. it would still collapse the economy rather than having the states bear the burden, which has been empirically proven to work better. Additionally, having both entities act in unison would not solve the federalism net benefit, which only has one argument against it in the entirety of the debate on the affirmative side. Our Brovman evidence indicates that this would necessarily lead to tyranny because we do not have a direct form of power balance between the federal government and the local government. That evidence also indicates that this type of balance is necessary to efficiency and effective government policies, meaning that the permutation can never solve the case or the net benefit, and there's no reason to prefer it. I'll continue this in the 1 and R.
Okay. Your argument is that spending a few $1 billion in community schools would collapse the economy into a Great Depression. Why didn't the financial crisis, the collapse of the dot-com bubble, September 11th attacks followed by a recession lead to this supposed next Great Depression?
I mean, maybe at those times the economy was a little more resilient than it is these days. Those all seem like reasons in the past.
What's different about our economy now?
Well, the 1 NC Chattanooga Times evidence seems to indicate that the economy is in a crucial point right now because of inflation scares. There's also been a large up and down over the last few months even that has put everyone into a perception-based bias. It's not as though the depression came on because of a large event. It was all in our heads, but we still did.
Okay, so you talked about perception in this last point, and you've talked about how the plan would be seen as unpredictable, which would scare away people like investors in our economy, correct?
More or less.
Okay. My question is, the budget took about 4 months, whereas in limbo, we were 4 months late on settling what the budget would be for the next year and some guidelines of what it would be for the next 4 years. Why didn't that scare away investors? Why didn't that have a perception of weakness in our fiscal restraint?
Well, I don't know, because those things were televised and you could watch the budgetary process take place on paper as well through programs that were released to the public.
Well, speaking of information,
this needs to be put in context of the 1AC, which guarantees full funding for people who apply for the program, meaning these schools can just continuously apply as need be indefinitely through the future. Meaning that a budgetary process, which provides a lot.
Is your argument that if the school gets the funding for a community, if a school becomes a community school the first time, it can reapply for more money to get like twice the amount for the same school?
I mean, your argument in the 1AC is that they will be fully funded. That is the text of your plan text, which means that any claim that these schools can make as to why they are not fully funded, because it's a giant poverty problem that they're trying to solve, it's probably a reason why they can apply for more funding.
Okay. All right. Your argument, actually after a while, is the time frame of the DEA happened so fast, so it happened before any